This time we wanted to have some students available to all of you to talk about a little bit about their experiences with some standards-based learning, answer questions you might have. And so I will start, we'll start with Mr. Rudy, who is our teacher on this panel, but then they can introduce themselves as we go. So.
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. I'm Emily Hers. I'm a sophomore here at Chilton.
Jack, that's you.
I'm Jack, I'm a freshman here.
I'm Cameron Owens, I'm a junior here.
I'm Emily Harlan, I'm a junior here too.
So, if you have questions off the bat, if you can start with those, otherwise I can certainly facilitate the discussion. We'll go with some questions you may have. Are there any questions? So I'll open it up. Have any of you, are there any of you that can comment on your experiences at Chilton High School with standards-based learning, just in general? Any comments on it? Where have you experienced them, and what classes, and what was that experience?
I've experienced, I had geometry class sophomore year. I really appreciated standards-based learning in that class specifically. So I got positive benefits out of it. And that's the only one I've really had, so that's what I can speak for.
In what way?
Like the positives?
Yeah.
I'm not like the strongest at math, so I found that being able to retake the standards allowed me in cases where I say I didn't know the material as well, I would be able to retake it and really like genuinely learn it versus just cramming for a test or trying to shove information into my brain, and I could just take it as many times as necessary for me to actually learn and comprehend that material.
Anybody else?
I had personal finance this year, and I found it helped me. I don't have problems testing a lot, but occasionally if I'm very stressed over a test and I'm worried about it, I'm worried about that. You get one shot and you're done. This helped me prepare for tests and take it with a clear mind, knowing that this wasn't my only chance to succeed. And when you're on a path for post-secondary and you're really worried about GPA and grades, it's just very helpful having reassurance that you can do it again.
I have standards-based learning in geometry and English class. And same with Emily, I like it in geometry because it's a very kind of straightforward way of having it. Like 1, 2, 3, or 4, so you just kind of know where you are and it's easy to understand.
I had standards-based learning in geometry class, and I found that if I did not grasp like a certain concept and I just wasn't getting it, I could do the requirement for that standard to do a retake, and I would genuinely learn the material, and I found that was really helpful. I had another class with standards-based learning, but it was the incomplete 1, 2, 3. That one was a little bit harder for me to understand, but now that I've been through standards-based a little bit more, I'm grasping that concept more, and it's a lot easier to understand.
So, Mr. Rudy, a number of them commented on the fact that they had geometry as one of their classes with standards-based learning. What have been your observations in terms of a different approach to the learning process?
Sure. I'm the geometry teacher, so thank you all for those nice comments. I expected from Jack because he's currently in geometry class and he knows to say good things. Having the standards, and what I want to make very clear is that there's standards-based learning and then there's standards-based grading. The standards-based learning is simply that what you learn in this geometry class at Chilton High School is going to be what you learn in a different geometry class in a different high school. Because we are all following the standards, the core curriculum state standards for math. What the standards do then is make sure that the material they need to see in the course of a geometry class, they see. We're preparing them for future math classes, we're preparing them to take the ACT. They're there shouldn't be gaps or things that we don't get to. So there's that. Now, the standards-based grading, the way I do it in my class, every standard, and there's 24 in a quarter that we do, 24 different things that we cover and kids get assessed on. Every standard I assess with a 4-question assessment. Based on the number you get right, from 0 to 4, that's your score. My bottom line is you have to get 3. 3 out of 4, that's great. 4 out of 4, wonderful. 2 out of 4, not good enough. And if you get a 2, 1, or 0, then you have to do a retake. And the process for doing a retake is you usually get a worksheet that's extra problems, extra practice. Do that on your own when you're ready. Then you turn that in, I'll check it over, maybe have a discussion with you if you're still not getting something. And then I make sure that you're ready to go and you can take your retake. And most of the time, kids will take a retake and then they'll do just fine the second time around. Once in a while, things get tough, and kids will have to take a number of retakes in a row. But I have not yet had somebody that tried and couldn't succeed. I've had a couple of students that didn't try, and one of them's back in math class this year doing geometry a second time. You know what? They're doing a lot better, because you don't get to fail. You just get to do it over. And I think that's a good thing.
So not all classes here at Chilton are standard-based grading right now?
No, we're working towards that. Some of us piloted things last year and are expanding the use of that this year. And I think next year the requirement is that every teacher will have at least one class that's standards-based, and then the year after next, everything is going to be.
So certainly, we're not immune to perceptions out there. For the students out there, do you believe that there are students out there who, because of the retake policy, don't try at all? Is that similar, different, or just basic comments on whether or not you saw that pre-standards-based learning, or whether you think that that's a bigger problem now with standards-based learning? Thoughts on that?
I think it's pretty much the same. Like if you want, like me, I want to do good in school. So no matter if it's standards or just what it is now, I'm going to try to do my best and get a good grade. People who don't or don't put that effort in or are slackers, they're going to do the same thing in standards-based classes. I don't think it's increasing the problem or making it worse.
Cameron, any thoughts?
I mean, you either have the motivation or you don't. It's as simple as that. It's gotta come from you. The grading is gonna change how you prepare.
Jack?
I do have one of my classes where my teacher comments on that a lot, but he does it so where like in many classes, if you're going to do a retake, you have to do certain requirements, so you actually do end up learning the material eventually, even if you have to do a retake.
I feel that without standards-based learning, if you take a test and you do not do well and there is no chance for a retake, that's your score, and if you want to try for that class, you're gonna study and you're gonna do all the requirements. But with standards-based, the requirements are usually graded, so if you're not doing the work, you're still gonna end up doing the work. Otherwise, it's an incomplete, and then you do not pass that class. So I feel that it really gives a lot of credit and responsibility to the student. So if they're not doing their work, then it's just gonna pile up and pile up and pile up, and you're gonna have to do the work in order to pass that class.
You guys all seem like you're good students and you do have the motivation, so do you think that you are learning more with this, or would you have learned it the old way to learn the skills and the material?
I think either way. I mean, I've had that the way it usually is all the way up until high school, so I mean, that's just mainly what I've known as teaching. I wouldn't say that I learned less, I'd say that it's pretty much the same.
It just changes your mindset a little bit for learning. Like Emily said, it doesn't change the amount that you're learning. It teaches discipline and you learn other things in other ways, but it also changes your mindset to the standards learning, if that's what you're learning, or the grading, if that's how your class is being graded.
Other question? Or any of you can answer, but do you find it fair that, say you had a basketball game and you get home late and you stay up and study till midnight and you get a B, but someone else on your basketball team chose not to study, got an F, and was allowed to retake it, and now has the same grade as you? I mean, you invested that extra time, the responsibility, but now the person who didn't, because I had a basketball game, I didn't want to study when I got home, now has the same grade as you. I mean, do you guys think that, are you guys okay with that, or, because on paper you look exactly the same?
I mean, I personally wouldn't be frustrated, because, I mean, if they're retaking and retaking, but they're getting to that point, they're putting in some sort of effort at some point. Even if I put it in initially and crammed it till midnight, I mean, you're still getting to that B, if that makes sense.
And in the end, we all have the option to not do the effort right away. So, I mean, it's all personal decisions.
I feel as though just knowing that, like, you put in the effort is kind of enough.
Definitely the amount of motivation, like if you study and you study until midnight and you're tired the next morning, it's and it doesn't really show up on the test, like that's your score, but if you're retaking and you're retaking, that's more work if you're being lazy. So if you're not doing the work, I'm gonna end up doing the work anyways. So if you're not gonna do it then when are you going to find the time to do it over?
I have a question. The motivation of the students overall, this is probably hard towards Mr. Ruby. Do you feel that kids are taking advantage of that, taking it over and over? And then is your class like all over the board? You have kids that are still studying for that first exam, and you have kids that are on their 6th exam. Do you find that you got that range though?
A little bit. Probably not as much as you might think. There are gonna be the handful of students that will drag their feet, and 2 months down the road, will be doing retakes for the first chapter. Okay, you do that fine, and I've seen that happen, but not very often with a lot of kids. I've seen kids that you would say are classic D-, barely passed by the skin of your teeth kind of kids. Through intro to algebra and algebra, come into geometry, and suddenly it's a system they can work with, and they come out of it having done every bit, every standard, passed everything with a 3 or better, and walk out with a B+ or an A-, and you say, this kid got a D in algebra, and okay, they may not remember much, a year down the road from what they did, but it gives them confidence. It lets them perhaps take the next math course with a better attitude than they've had in the past. And I think that's some of the advantage for a standards-based system like I do in geometry, at least. There are gonna be kids that will try to game the system, but in the end, they don't get to. If they're doing the work ahead of time and doing well on the test the first time it's given, or they're doing all the extra retake problems before they can even do the retake, they're doing and they're learning and they're gonna pass. Or they're not, and they're gonna be back, and then they're gonna pass. I think that's the favorite saying we have, is the punishment for not doing the work is doing the work. But you're gonna do it sometime. And a lot of kids just figure it out. And I have a handful of students that have never done a retake, because they don't have to. They studied and they have it and they get it right the first time. And good for them, The time that other kids are spending redoing things, you can do something else with that time then. And that's your advantage. But it's not punishing the kids that don't pass the first time. It's helping them along. That's how I feel.
How do you, so you have an assessment, you have a group of students that first time they're good, another group that, no, they need to work on this more. What do you do? Is it next unit, and we're working on the next unit, and you guys gotta be doing both at the same time? How do you do that?
Yeah, we keep going. We go to the next unit, we're doing stuff, and where we do, in a block class, we have an hour and a half. The first hour is spent going over homework for our current thing, doing a new lesson. And then the last maybe 20 to 30 minutes is work time. Some kids are working on homework, other kids are putting their current homework off because they're doing retake stuff, or they're doing both. I've had a bunch of kids come in during homeroom times and be in my class during homeroom and do their retake work then. And that's fine, whatever you wanna do is okay. Yeah, the train doesn't stop just because a few people are struggling to catch up. We still go, and the kids understand that. I hope, is that helpful? These fine people up here can't speak to
I have
the struggles like some kids can.
I have an observation about reassessment from Rachel's perspective, ninth grader with different classes. And her and I noticed some inconsistencies about reassessment, and it's something I wanna call out to all the teachers in the room and to Mr. Brightlow, because that's an ask I have as a parent and of students, is that reassessment be consistent across the classes, cause it's causing some confusion and a little bit of frustration, so I'll give you a couple examples. So, for example, in American Studies, we found that if there's an assignment and Rachel gets a 2 on something in that assignment, she'll come to Mrs. Cooper and say, how can I reassess on this? And Mrs. Cooper works with her, and it's really, that one individual part of that assignment, she'll reassess, okay, she's got a 3, she's good, moving on. In Science 9, Rachel asked about how do I reassess on this thing I got a 2 on, she was told she could not reassess on that. She wasn't told that prior, so I'd like to know, I think it would be fair to students that going through reassessment, what is reassessable in the class and what is not? If there are things that are not reassessable, that should be made very clear to all students from the beginning of the class or the unit. At our last SBL meeting, we made about in social studies, I think it was maybe a 10th grade social studies class, that if a student wanted to reassess, they had to fill out a form to be reassessed, so that's different. So I'm seeing that those differences, I think it would be nice to maybe have that consistent, or at least have teachers talk about it. At least, I know, for example, in 6th grade, there's a lot of interaction across those 4 teachers about being consistent across each class. So I would ask that we work on that at the high school as well. It's just an observation I want to share, and would hope you guys take that as an
Can
action.
I ask a clarifying question? This young lady was in intro to algebra and she could not retake a test?
No, Science 9.
Oh, Science 9.
It wasn't a test, it was like a project grade. So she said that there's no way you can reassess on that standard, so.
So Max was in English and I was really unsure about how that worked too. And what I was told is that that standard is often assessed multiple times throughout the unit. So you may have gotten a 2 this time on your citations, but you will have another chance to do citations on another project later, and your final grade or your final 2 or 3 is the way it is. You can get better and better and better.
So here's, and that's another observation.
If that's, I don't know, Mr. Brightlow, if that's correct?
It is, and I don't, Mrs. Bartles isn't here, so we can't, ask her directly about that, but, all summative assessments that are SBL aligned right now have retake policies. The retake policy that's consistent across the building, is that a student needs to be reassessing, they need to have some type of learning activity prior to reassessing, and a conference with that teacher. So that is the bare minimum, which is probably why you see some people tracking it differently, which could be for the form. But I don't know how to comment on the specific project or whatever. Because anything that is a summative assessment, and Mrs. Murray, you can certainly chime in, we have as the ability to be retaken.
Yeah, what I was gonna add, because I'm the 10th grade biology teacher, so Mr. and Mrs. Bartles and myself all work, we all have the same reassessment policy. One thing that we do have in place are timelines for reassessment. So we don't say you have the entire semester to reassess on Unit 1 assessment. We have a limitation of 1 week to start that process. So you have 1 week from the moment you get feedback to come and speak with myself, or if it was Mr. or Mrs. Bartles, and say, you know, I'm looking to reassess on standard 2.2, can we talk about this process? And once that conversation is had, the window of opportunity is open, but we don't want to have that door constantly open for students to play the game of how their grades weighed out, and then we're at the last week of the semester, and now I wanna go back and do Unit 1, Unit 3, Unit 6. So I don't know if, and I,
That was not the case.
Yeah.
with this.
so I would say, I would just talk to Mrs. Bartles, because I know that she has a very similar policy. There might be some other limiting factors contributing to that.
Another question I have about, I guess it maybe goes a little bit along with reassessment is, so I'll give an example of what we're seeing in Science 9, and maybe you can comment on this because you said the policies are the same, and what I heard though has been different about the theory of standard-based learning. So notice that within Science 9, you know, in the spreadsheet that Stephanie uses, I'm assuming that you're
Yes.
using that same spreadsheet. So you have all these, you know, here's the standard and all the different assessments
Yep.
throughout the quarter so far. And so student has lots of threes, and up here they get a 2 here. That total assessment is a 3. You know, it's still remaining a 3.
Yep.
The theory behind standard-based learning is you assess, and you assess, and if that, whatever, say you were at a 3, and then your last one's a 2, you get a 2 for that standard. So that is the theory I've read, and I've heard like elementary school teachers or middle school teachers talk about that theory. So that's different than what I'm seeing in Science 9, so I wanna understand are we doing, and are all classes here doing it the same way?
There are different theories, okay? Some speak to that, where we're gonna take the most recent and the most recent only. What we do in science is we start initially by taking the mode. So what are we seeing this student do for this standard most frequently? We also go back at the end of a grading period, which for us is the end of the semester, and we look at each student, this is time consuming, but we look at each student and each standard, and we say, okay, this is what their score is moded to. However, is that accurate based off of the most recent scores? And we do sometimes tweak them if the score is moded to a 2, but most recently they've had more consecutive 3s. We might tweak that overall score. So I can see where there's some confusion there, because I think some of the grading practices just strictly look at what is the most recent. And we wanted to look at the entire, those skills or those standards, what they're able to do holistically all semester long, and just not, what were they able to do most recently? And the reason for that is, the standards we do are a little bit different in math. The standards we do are applied in each unit. So they are analyzing and interpreting data when they're looking at cells, when they're looking at genetics. So the limitations in how they're performing on a standard might not be the standard practice, it might be their understanding of the content, and those are both infused when we assess. So that's kind of why we needed to have a hybrid of not just looking at most recent, but what are they doing consistently?
I agree, I think that makes sense, because, I mean, you can go along and get all these 3s and also the 2.
I get a 1, yeah, at the end of the
it's
semester.
like, it doesn't make sense. So in American Studies, are you using that same?
Yeah, it's similar where, you know, what Brittany was talking about is the content. Like, for example, we do claim evidence reasoning every single unit, but a student might have a better understanding and grasp of like World War II versus the Cold War. So then their Cold War score is lower. So yeah, we look at the mode, we look at what they're doing over across the board. Because, you know, I'm assessing them on the skill, but I also have to be cognizant of the fact that not everyone's a World War II expert, you know, and to be honest, like when it comes down, you know, 5 years from now, do I really necessarily care that they remember, you know, this battle on this day and what happened? No, I want them to be able to have a conversation with someone about the history of our United States and how we got to the point where we are today. So that's more of the skill that I'm assessing them on, if that makes sense.
We can't have consistency.
Yeah, it can't all be the same.
We can't have perfect consistency, let's say that, because classes are different, teachers are different, grades are different, what you're assessing is different. You know, where I'm having kids solve problems, in Phi Ed, they're lifting weights, you know, it's completely different. In science, they're doing other things, And so while we can have ideals, we can be different in there. You know, and my retake policy can be different than a science retake policy, or different than a social studies retake policy, because they're different classes.
Well, and that's fair, I think it's just really calling out at the beginning of a class, what is reassessable and what is not. It's making sure that expectation is clear, and I definitely got, with Rachel very surprised, why can't I reassess on this? So it really comes down, and I'll talk to Stephanie about that at parent-teacher conferences, but again, because her overall score, she's still a 3, it's like, Rachel's like, I don't think I need to worry about it. I'm like, no, I'm not worried about it, we'll just talk to Stephanie at parent-teacher conferences and make sure we're on the same page. That's where it gets a little bit frustrating, because we're kind of going through this, we're in a guinea pig kind of phase, it feels like, and that just is a struggle for some students to have to be in that phase.
So then my question is, we see all these standard-based learning grades on Power School, and it's like, oh, you have all these 3s and a 1, like, do we not panic? Because, well, you're gonna end up getting a 3, and we really won't know till the end what you have. Like, at the end of the semester, that's when you're really going to tell what the number is, where, how do we know then if?
I guess it's harder for you, because a lot of those conversations we're having with students real time. I just sat down and did it with all of my students at the end of what would be the term, which we don't have in biology anymore, but sitting down with them and talking about that, talking with them about which standards they really don't have to, not necessarily not worry about, but that they are consistently just demonstrating that they know what to do. But here are the standards that you are struggling with. Let's talk about the standard. What are some, what are the types of feedback that you're generally getting from me on a routine basis? Start thinking about that and how you can apply that in future assessments. I know it's harder for you guys because all you see, are these numbers, but the students should be having conversations with their teacher about where they're at and how they're doing in that progression. I think that they probably have a much better handle on it. And for you too, if you're looking at one standard and you see that there's growth, then hopefully by the end of the semester that projection of growth is gonna continue in the right direction. But if you're seeing the opposite, then maybe that's a conversation to have with your student. Hey, you started off with 2s and 3s, and now you're at 1s and 2s on this standard. Is this something we need to work on, or do you have thoughts of reassessment? I guess that's just my experience.
To the students, I want to ask, what is your input about what we need to improve on, where you see us needing to grow, how we can best educate you on this? What is your feedback to all of us?
I think I would agree with the making it clear right away in the beginning of classes. Because I've only had one class, but after hearing that, I could see how, especially freshmen coming in, everything being new already, that could be really confusing.
Appreciate that. Others?
I don't think it's unfair for the parents to have some clarity on what their student has as far as a grade. I think that's a reasonable expectation. So I think that should be better communicated, or at least explained so they can understand that.
For myself personally, it's pretty new. I'm so used to seeing an A and B and knowing, using that as motivation for myself. So when I see a 2.8 or something like that, I'm just not quite sure how to motivate myself or if that's good or not.
I think really communicating to the students and to the parents as well, how standards-based grading and learning is going to affect you not only in the present but in the future, and how you're going to be learning in more ways than one, and it is relevant to a lot of outside of school predicaments or things that need to be solved. So I just feel like communication and clarity is really a factor that we could maybe work on. And
Final questions for our student panel, or Mr. Rudy, or any of the teachers, frankly? Okay, well, thank you all so much. Very, very busy people, and appreciate the time and perspective, and certainly the feedback for growth as well. Okay. Mr. Platt, are you gonna usher us to our next one?
Certainly. It depends on if they'd like to see our presentation, or if they just have questions, it might be best if we just go next door. Okay, yeah. It's all right. My classroom's right next door. If you guys would like to join me. Thank you.